Sí, señorita. Entiendo mucho.
That's Courtney Kardashian there trying to convince us of her ability to speak Spanish. Joining us is Katie Lenehan from the Dublin Academy. Katie, what do you think of Courtney's Spanish there? Muy bueno?
Why does she kind of sound like me teaching my 6th-year-olds?
Well, you know, we're talking about Spanish at the minute and we're getting very close to the oral exams. What are students facing here?
Okay, so with the oral exams, I think the first thing that students face is how much they catastrophize the whole thing. The examiner's job, like we've been saying for all of the other subjects today, is to give you marks, right? So you go into this oral exam, you're in there for 12 or 15 minutes and you start off with nothing. So every single thing that you say, the only goal with that is to try and get a few marks for each thing. Like the examiner's not going to sit there and hear you make one mistake and like deduct 10 marks straight away or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like they're on your side as well. Like it's in everyone's best interest for this exam to go well for you. You know what I mean? And the reality of it is, I think with the oral exams, is that students tend to forget that the person sitting in front of you is a Leaving Cert teacher as well. So like if I was doing the oral exams, in the back of my head, I'm thinking of my poor 6th years getting examined, and I want to try and treat the students that I'm examining the same way that I would hope that my 6th years are being examined. Do you know? So that there's kind of like a nice little sense of community across all of these examiners that we want to take care of these students.
They're rooting for you.
Yeah, exactly.
If a situation happens where you don't understand something or don't quite get what the examiner says or asks you, what should you do there?
Really, really good question. Okay, because I think there's a little rumour going around the 6th years across the country that if you don't understand something, it's like immediate fail, right? Which is a lie, okay?
Fake news.
Yes, exactly. But anyway, so the point of that is, right, so let's say if you go in and the examiner says something and maybe they use a word that isn't in your vocabulary. What I would say to the 6th years is ask the examiner to either repeat the question or ask them if they can ask you that question in a different way, or can they slow down a little bit and try and kind of, I don't know, initiate the fact that like you need a little bit of help, right? Because to me, I would way rather take that 10 seconds to help you understand the question so that you can answer the question correctly versus, for argument's sake, if you just went off one word in the question and you weren't 100% sure what I was asking you, that you'd end up wasting 2 minutes of your oral exam answering something incorrectly, which is going to hinder the marks that you get. So have a sentence for, can you repeat the question, please? Could you slow down, please? Could you ask me that in a different way? And in a similar vein, if you feel like you have made a mistake or you've recognised that you've made a mistake, or like if the examiner starts doing like a weird hand gesture or something, you know, don't freak out again. That's them trying to say like, if you can fix this, you know, let's fix it. Learn a sentence to say, oh, sorry, I made a mistake. I meant to say this. Like if they ask you like, what are you doing this summer? And you accidentally start talking about what you did last summer, but you realise a sentence or two in, again, instead of wasting your time getting to the end of that answer and answering the question incorrectly, acknowledge that you've gotten something wrong and correct yourself.
Yeah, perfect. In terms of preparing for this exam, you say that people should role play first. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so with the oral exam, so kind of similar to the idea of the study buddies, I think a good thing to do is find someone in like your group of friends or your class that has a similar target grade, right? And it doesn't have to be the same target grade for the full exam, but it could just be for the oral exam. So you and your friend both want to get a H1 in the oral exam. And yes, you could absolutely like play examiner and the candidate and go through, you know, both kind of roles in it, because you have two things to worry about. You have your general conversation, which is 70 marks, and then you have your role play at the end of it. Which is essentially just like you have 5 little situations and the examiner has a card, like I have a character and you have a character. For one of them, I have to pretend to be the parent and you have to tell me that you're so excited that the European Parliament has prohibited the use of plastic forks. You know, very normal conversations that you would be having. But it's important maybe for the students in that situation to learn what both people in the role play have to say so that you avoid kind of like the awkward silence if you don't know when I'm meant to stop. So like if I have another sentence to say on my half, and then if Gav was my student and he says, he interrupts me and I'm like, oh no, like you've thrown the whole thing off. So it's important to be aware of what the examiner has to say as well, so that you're listening out for those keywords for when your answer has to start.
Okay. Moving on to the written exam then. What is the format of that paper?
Okay, so written exam has 3 sections, A, B and C. Very imaginative names. Section A is 70 marks, which makes up 17.5% of your Leaving Cert grade. And all that Section A is kind of dealing with is reading comprehension. So students have 2 long comprehensions at the beginning of Section A to choose from. And let this be a warning. You can only answer question 1A in Section A if you have read a book in Spanish. Most students won't have read this book in class. I don't do it with my 6th years. So that means that 90% of students are going to do question 1B, which is the journalistic text, which is kind of like just like an article, and you have different questions to answer about it. The one I'm doing with my 6th years at the moment is apparently about how pets and owners share obesity, which doesn't do wonders for the self-esteem. But that's worth 50 marks, so that's 12.5%. And then the remaining marks in Section A are given to the 2 kind of short comprehensions, and they combined make up another 20 marks. And then you have Section B, which I know for a fact is all the 6th years want me to talk about, because Section B is worth 100 marks, right? So Section B is worth the same amount of marks as your oral exam, right? So combined, those 2 components make up 50% of your grade. So Section B in the written paper, 25% of your Leaving Cert grade. Questions 1 to 4 in Section B are again comprehension questions that are all just based off this like really long like A4 page text. And before I get on to question 5 of Section B, if you were to think about everything I've just said to you there, so all of Section A and the first 4 questions in Section B, everything has been reading comprehension so far. And when we're talking about like practicing for the subjects, whatever, I want this to be very, very clear to the 6th years that your reading comprehensions are the biggest component of your Leaving Cert exam. They're more important than the oral exam, than the listening, than your opinion pieces, because they make up 30% of your final grade. So again, that to me would be like top of my list of priorities, that I'm doing a minimum of 1 comprehension every single week, because I want to get used to those questions that come up and the vocab that comes up. And then after that Section B comprehension, we have our opinion piece. And this is what the 6th years don't like that much, because they are very, very unpredictable. And it's essentially like a little mini essay question. And that's worth another 50 marks, or 12.5% of your Leaving Cert grade. So that brings us then to the last section of the exam, which is Section C. And this is kind of where the examiner actually gets to see what your real level of Spanish is like versus the stuff that you've been able to rote learn. It has 2 questions. So question 1, you have a choice to do a dialogue construction, which is like a translation, or a formal letter. Formal letter isn't, for me, I don't like it. I just think it's so unrealistic that a 6th year student is ever going to write a letter in Spanish to the editor of a Spanish newspaper. But, you know, if that's your thing, great. So they have the dialogue construction, and that's 30 marks. And then they have the choice between a diary entry and a note, and that makes up the remaining 20 marks. And speaking of that, there is also a little bit of a myth that the note is always the easier question to do. It's certainly a little bit shorter in terms of what students would write for it. I don't necessarily think that the diary or the note, that there's an easier one of the 2. Okay. I think they're quite different. If you are a student that is very good at knowing how to ask questions, knowing how to give orders or whatever, then the note is for you, because you'll be asked to maybe leave a note saying, like, could you collect me from the airport or something, where the diary entry is kind of really just about you, which is a little bit more approachable for a lot of students. So that would make up the entire written exam.
How would you suggest that people use their time in this exam?
Okay, now I have a lot of numbers here in front of me, so I want to get this right. Okay, so you're going into your written exam. It's 2.5 hours, so you have 150 minutes to deal with. I'm under a lot of pressure because there's maths teachers in the room. So the reality of it is, a lot of students, because they're so used to having really, really content-heavy exams, that Spanish doesn't really feel that bad in terms of timing. It's a little bit approachable. What I would say is that students misuse their time, in that they, again, you'll go into the Leaving Cert hall and every single student is like trying to find the opinion piece titles to get to them first. And I would say, again, versus going in and starting off with the most complex question, like we said earlier, you want to give yourself a little bit of a plan. So what I would do, you're going to start off, you're going to give yourself 10 minutes to just scan the paper, get familiar with it, maybe have a look and see what opinion piece title you're going to pick. Just kind of get the overall, I don't know, vibe of the paper. Yeah. Then you're going to spend 25 minutes on your journalistic text, and then 10 minutes on your short comprehension. That's Section A done. Section B, then we are going to spend 25 minutes on the comprehension questions, and then 30 minutes on the opinion piece. What I would do with that, and again, this is something that the 6th years don't love, I would spend 10 minutes planning my answer for the opinion piece, making sure that whatever I want to say, I'm actually able to say, that can be quite different sometimes, okay, for myself included. I would then spend 15 minutes writing my answer and then 5 minutes proofreading it, that section be done. Dialogue construction, 25 minutes, diary entry, 20 minutes, and that gives us 5 minutes at the end to make sure that everything is labelled, that everything is very clear to the examiner, that we have any little bits of rough work or whatever labelled clearly, and you can tie your exam up and you are free to go. And in saying that, after your written exam, do not go home. Okay, there is a 10-minute break after anyone goes home, right? But there's a 10-minute break after the written exam before the listening exam starts, which is the opposite of what happens in Irish, which again can kind of throw some people off. So please don't go home.
Very important.
Yeah. Like unless you want to lose that 20%, then that's on you.
Yeah.
And then you have your oral exam after the written paper.
Finally, what do you want students to consider about, like if they get something wrong in the exam paper that they're worried about, that they didn't answer a question fully? Just what are the main things to focus on in doing this exam? Okay, so again, prioritising your comprehensions, practicing them, making sure that because the questions are the same every single year, that if you don't understand what you have to do for a certain question, that you deal with that sooner rather than later. You talk to your Spanish teacher and say, I don't really know what this question means. Can you figure out a way to help me with this? That's fine. Opinion piece, you're going to have 3 choices, and initially what most students do is they're going to go in and see like a buzzword, say like health or sport or language or whatever, and they'll say ding ding ding, like I have an answer that says sport or health or whatever in it, and then they're shocked that they don't get good marks for it. The opinion piece, half of your marks go to the relevance to the question. So for argument's sake, if it was something like sport is important for everybody, you can't just talk about why you play sports. You have to talk about why is it beneficial for everyone. So what I say to the students is, with the opinion piece, look at the question and try and identify the buzzwords that you have. If you can pick out 3 buzzwords, try and think about that as like each one of those buzzwords is worth a third of your marks. That like if you just completely neglect one of them that you're saying to the examiner, you keep that third of your marks for yourself. So make sure that you're planning your answer for that. With the dialogue construction and the diary entry, I love a layout for the diary entry, even though it's not formally worth a lot of marks. I'm someone that in an exam, I tend to panic a little bit, and I like having something that I can just put on the piece of paper and kind of get myself set up and get comfortable and ready to answer the question. Dialogue construction, you're always going to be tested on things like the verb gustar, because that's going to use a different structure. You'll often see words like problema or sistema, which look feminine but are masculine. They'll often test you on things like la gente, which means people but is treated as a singular noun in Spanish. And something that a lot of sixth years don't know, when we're talking about examiners giving you clues and all that stuff, I would say to my sixth years, every time that we do a dialogue construction, I even actually asked them about it today after their mock. You have, like, my advice to you would be, if you're filling in your half of a conversation, to read every single thing that's said in the conversation first. They might give you a clue and say like, this is the verb to go camping, or this is the word for summer camp, or this is like who you're talking to. Figure out, is it a formal or an informal conversation? Are you speaking to a boy or a girl? Are you meant to be a boy or a girl for the conversation? So read the entire thing in the dialogue construction before you answer your question yourself. Okay. Great advice there. Gracias. Thank you, Katie Lenehan.